Good morning, welcome. Thank you for being here today. My name is Tiffany Caban, council member in the 22nd. I am the chair of the Committee on Women and Gender Equity. My pronouns are she, her, and we are here today to talk about Councilmember Gutierrez's bill on universal child care. So we're gonna just dig right in. A city without universal child care is a city, in my opinion, that kicks dirt in the faces of its families, children, and parents, especially mothers. And forcing families to push themselves to the brink of bankruptcy just to obtain childcare is outrageous. It's cruel, it's economically idiotic. Think about it. What do parents, particularly moms, do if they can't afford childcare? All too often, the answer is to cut their hours or leave the workforce altogether. And that costs our city over $2 billion in lost tax revenue every year, not to mention the over $20 billion in lost economic output. Of course, this burden falls especially hard on moms, especially moms of color. So it's not only outrageous, cruel, and economically idiotic, but it's also racist and sexist. So, for us, we think that the choice is simple. Does our city stand for trapping its children and families in poverty? Does it stand for undermining future generations? Does it stand for telling parents, especially moms, that they don't matter? Or does it stand for healthy, thriving families? Does it stand for shared economic prosperity? Does it stand for equipping children to lead happy, fulfilling lives? And if the latter, then there's no two ways about it. We need universal child care. So excited to have this bill heard here today. And I want to thank all of the members of my team, my Chief of Staff, Celia Castellan, my Comms Director, Jesse Meyerson, my Legislative Director, Madhuri Shukla, as well as the committee staff, Christy Dwyer, Sahar Mozami, and we have a new member of the team, right, or no? That's it for now. Yeah. And also just a big thanks to team Councilmember Gutierrez, who worked really, really hard for this hearing as well. And I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague.
Thank you, Chair, and thank y'all for waiting. Thank you for joining us today, and a special thank you to Chair Caban and Speaker Adams for their unwavering.
Oh, your mic's not on. Oh, it's on.
It's on.
It's just not working.
No trabaja. You want to try the other one? Hello?
There you go.
Misleading little light. All right. Reimagine my charm again. We'll start over. Thank you all for joining us today, and a special thank you to my friend, Chair Caban and Speaker Adams, for their unwavering support in advancing this historic bill. The truth is, we can no longer afford to delay universal childcare. The existing system is deeply, deeply flawed, and while the administration's efforts represent a step in the right direction, they fall short of the comprehensive transformation that is desperately needed by parents, providers, and our economy of care. This bill is a meticulously crafted plan shaped by the wisdom of advocates and providers who have dedicated decades to this field. But the reality is, this isn't just about children and families, it's about the resurgence of our communities and the invigoration of our economy. Without it, our city faces a staggering loss of $23 billion in economic output and $2.2 billion in tax revenue annually. Figures drawn from the mayor's own blueprint on childcare. Moreover, this bill addresses the long-standing injustices endured by the predominantly Black, brown, and immigrant women who form the backbone of our child care workforce. It's high time we provide them with their fair wages and benefits they deserve for their indispensable work they perform in nurturing our children. Rather than simply reiterating that we all recognize what we all recognize to be true, I'd like to share some stories that came from New Yorkers United for Childcare. A significant number of parents were forced to make career adjustments, many transitioning to part-time roles or exiting the workforce altogether. Leslie chose not to return to work after having her child, as the cost of childcare far exceeded her salary at the time. Jen, employed by New York City's Department of Education, was offered a promotion, but had to withdraw from the workforce entirely because neither position paid enough to cover childcare expenses. Maxwell echoed this sentiment. Between health insurance and childcare costs, it makes more sense for one of us to stay home most of the time. Add in housing, and it feels like the city doesn't want us here. Alarmingly, more than half the respondents to a survey about the need for childcare reported that they have contemplated leaving the city due to the exorbitant cost of childcare. This financial burden has broader economic repercussions as families find themselves with less disposable income. Lee wrote, "We definitely have far less money to spend on domestic and personal expenses than we would have otherwise." Kevin further emphasized this point, noting, "We've had to postpone our bills and negotiate with our providers." Another parent wrote in, we've had to dip into our retirement savings to afford childcare. All these accounts come from families with a combined household income of or exceeding $120,000 per year, residing in one of the world's wealthiest cities. In New York City, the median household income stands at $67K a year. This glaring disparity is undeniable, and the consequences are painfully evident. The idea of a free public K-12 education was once seen as radical, but we now know it to be foundational for the success of our communities and economy. Universal childcare is no different, and each day that passes without it harms providers, families, and our economy. I'm grateful to Chair Caban once again for elevating this issue, and to my colleagues and my co-sponsor, Councilmember Kevin Riley, for his support in moving the bill forward. Thank you.
Just a quick announcement. I want to sincerely apologize. At the moment, we do not have a Spanish translator in the room. Jen is going to translate this in a moment. But if you need Spanish translation, we are going to make it happen. Just throw your hand up.
Buenas, queremos pedir perdón porque no pudimos coordinar un traductor para la audiencia esta mañana, así que si necesitan traducciones en español, por favor, de parte de la cabeza Caban, sube su mano o indique por Zoom que necesita traducción y lo vamos a solucionar antes de terminar la audiencia. Muchas gracias.
And I want to acknowledge we have been joined by Council Members Riley and Stevens, and I'm going to pass it over to Councilmember Riley for some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Chair Caban. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to Councilmember Gutiérrez for co-sponsoring this very, very important bill. I'm not going to reiterate the points that Councilmember Gutiérrez stated, but I just want to reaffirm that this is extremely important for the ecosystem for parents. Being a council member is extremely important to me, but being a dad is even more important. A couple of weeks ago, I had to bring my son to a hearing. I saw comments online that were really nasty and we're speaking about that's unprofessional, but I'm glad that I'm a part of a city council, a majority woman, that creates a safe atmosphere for that. But a lot of parents out there do not have the luxury to bring their child to work. A lot of parents out there do not have the luxury to work even, because childcare is extremely important. Parents are paying up to $20,000, some even more, for childcare a year, and this is unacceptable. And this trickles down to our whole entire ecosystem. We don't have parents going to work. We have jobs that are available. This affects our transportation system. This affects small businesses. Parents need out. Parents need an out, and we need to become a city that we're actually looking out for working families within the city. So I just want to echo the sentiments of Councilmember Gutiérrez that she stated before. We understand that this is going to be extremely expensive, but it's going to be even more expensive if we do not support our parents in the long run. So thank you so much, Chair Caban, for holding this hearing. Thank you, Councilmember Gutiérrez. I'm looking forward to hearing from the administration.
Thank you, and I will pass it over to Committee Counsel to administer the oath.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. As a reminder, today is an in-person hearing with the option of virtual testimony for the public. The committee will be accepting registrations for testimony throughout the hearing. For those wishing to testify in person, please see the Sergeant-at-Arms in the back of the hearing room to fill out a testimony card, even if you registered in advance online. For those testifying via Zoom, your name will be called and you will be prompted to unmute. All those who wish to submit testimony, you may do so at testimony@council.nyc.gov. We will now hear testimony from members of the administration. Will you please raise your right hand? Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Okay. Can you hear? Okay, great, I can hear. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I am Michelle Page. I'm the Executive Director for the Mayor's Office of Child Care and Early Childhood Education. Thank you to Chair Caban, Councilmember Gutiérrez, and other members of the Committee on Women and Gender Equity, and all council members joining today's hearing. I appreciate the opportunity to share this important work that this office is doing in support of New York City's early childhood education system, and to testify about the intro to Bill 941. I am joined by the other two members of this office, Tova Gottesman, who is the Deputy Director, and Aaron Yarbrough, Senior Project Manager for Data Management. We appreciate the Council's continued commitment to ensuring New York City has high-quality birth to 5 early education system. In June 2022, Mayor Adams released the Blueprint for Child Care and Early Childhood Education, a plan for creating accessible, equitable, high-quality, and affordable child care and education in New York City. The Blueprint has 5 ambitious goals. First is to offer an accessible child care experience rooted in equity in New York City for families. Make child care affordable for families. Number 3 is to increase child care enrollment across the city. The next goal is to ensure child care programs are high quality and establish systems of support of the early childhood workforce. And number 5 is to create oversight and accountability structures for child care and early education. Achieving a high quality, affordable, and accessible early childhood system requires collaboration and partnership across more than a dozen city agencies, as well as our partners at the state, early childhood stakeholders, educators, and parents. We are pleased to share that of the 21 strategies laid out in the Blueprint, 3/4 are complete or are on track to meet the goal. Some highlights include the number of children enrolled in care with an ACS-issued low-income voucher has increased nearly 230% compared to June of 2022. We reduced the average yearly co-payment amount families must pay per child from $1,300 average yearly co-payment in May 2022 to $170. ACS cleared the voucher waitlist, offering the families of 35,000 children the opportunity to apply for child care assistance. In the first 6 months of the My City portal, the first online application for child care assistance, over 16,700 families have applied for child care. We launched a new child care center property tax abatement and business income tax credit, and launched the $100 million Child Care Quality and Innovation Initiative with Robin Hood, aimed at improving access to high quality and affordable child care. One of the strategies in the Blueprint calls for the establishment of the Office of Child Care and Early Childhood Education. Officially launched in February of 2023, the mission of this office is to ensure New York City children and their families have equitable access to high-quality, affordable child care and early education. The office will lead strategy and coordinate planning among city agencies, foster innovation in partnership with families, providers, experts, and the private sector, and promote effective communication, policy advocacy, and public engagement. We are excited to continue to build on the work that is already underway and chart the course to provide equitable and affordable childcare. One of the top priorities for this office is to engage with families and providers so that their voices, feedback, and recommendations are part of the solution to strengthening, supporting our city's early education system. To that end, in April, our office held the first ever summit focused on reimagining child care and early childhood education system. The conference included Councilmember Menin, parents, child care providers, advocates, the private sector, and government agencies to discuss how we can strengthen our early childhood system. The ideas and feedback generated at this summit will inform the next phase of strategic planning that our office will lead. Before diving into the details of Bill 941, I wanted to provide you with a brief overview of the city's child care and early childhood options for families to set the context for discussion for this bill. There are over 130,000 children birth to 5 years old enrolled in publicly funded care. New York City is proud to offer free and affordable childcare through New York City Public Schools, Head Start and Early Head Start, and vouchers that help parents cover the cost of childcare. New York City Public Schools offers infants, toddler, 3K, and pre-K services in a variety of settings, including community-based organizations, public schools, home-based settings, and pre-K centers. Public schools serves over 100,000 children birth to 5. Programs such as 3K and pre-K, school day, school year are free, regardless of income or immigration status, while other types of care, including infant, toddler, and 3K pre-K extended day, require the family to have an approved reason for care and be income eligible. This child must have a qualified immigration status as defined by federal rules. Early Head Start and Head Start programs are available for free for families with low incomes. In addition to the low income eligibility, Early Head Start and Head Start programs, whether facilitated by community-based organizations with direct federal contracts or through New York City Public School delegate contracts, supports children in foster care and our newest New Yorkers regardless of immigration status. Earlier this year, ACS launched Promise NYC, a child care assistance program for children whose immigration status disqualified them from federally or state-funded child care assistance. Currently, there are approximately 630 children enrolled in child care with the support of the Promise NYC subsidy. New York City also provides vouchers to eligible families to help cover the cost of child care. Families can use their voucher at an approved provider of their choice. To qualify for a voucher, the family must have an approved reason for care and an income eligibility. The child must have a qualified immigration status as defined by the federal rules. Currently, there are over 21,000 children under the age of 5 receiving child care vouchers. Approximately 9,000 vouchers are for children with a public assistance case, and over 12,000 are served through the ACS low-income voucher. Collectively, New York City relies on billions of dollars to fund and maximize capacity of our early childhood system. Those funding streams, many of which are federal and state, require recipients like New York City to comply with regulations to receive that funding. It is also important that we spend the funding we have and fill our vacant seats. In May, we held briefings for several members of council, including Chair Gutiérrez, on the current state of the city's early childhood system and ways council can help ensure seats are filled. We appreciate the council's continued partnership on this. Our office will continue to advocate with our city agency partners and early childhood stakeholders to make childcare as affordable and available as we can. We are pleased to share that many of the provisions within 941 are already underway or will launch later this fall by our office in partnership with the city agencies. New York City agrees that every child under 5 in need of early child care should have access to a seat. The city has made enormous investments in our birth through 5 system. There are approximately 500,000 children under the age of 5 in New York City, and of those, over 130,000 are enrolled in a publicly funded child care program. New York City relies on a mix of state, city, and federal funding to administer and operate our early childhood system. Offering a seat to every child under the age of 5 requires significant state and federal funding. For universal child care to work, we must also consider the feasibility of space and more child care programs and do more to stabilize and build a sustainable early childhood workforce. One of the bills signed into law last fall, Local Law 102, establishes a Child Care Advisory Board, which includes an annual assessment of our progress towards universal child care, including the cost to do so. As the chair of that board, I look forward to meeting with the executive committee and starting this work on October 5th. The advisory board will include a broader coalition of early childhood advocates, policy experts, teachers, and families. In addition, Local Law 100 established a child care task force focused on making recommendations and the associated costs to make childcare more affordable, ways to support the workforce, and increase the supply of childcare programs. Our office will also take the lead, will also lead this task force, and we await a final appointee by council. Intro to Bill 941 also seeks to make it easier for families to know about the availability of childcare options in the languages of their choice. We agree and are pleased to share that the childcare application is available in 11 designated languages, including in the My City portal. Earlier this spring, the city launched a campaign called It Takes a City, which used a multimedia approach to market the availability of free and affordable childcare and early education throughout the city. Social media platforms, print advertisement, television and radio commercials connected families in multiple languages to information on how and where to apply for early childhood care by directing them to My City to learn more and to apply. As required by Law 101, the New York City Department of Health updated their Child Care Connect website to include a new map with features with the goal of making it easier for families to locate child care programs in the area of their choosing. We must also ensure that there are enough child care programs to support the unique needs of New York City families, especially those working with non-traditional hours. This office agrees that we must do more to support these families and to grow the number of providers offering care during non-traditional hours, and look forward to incorporating this work into our office. Earlier this month, as part of the Child Care Quality and Innovation Fund, Robin Hood announced it would issue 3 grants totaling $3 million to ACS to help expand access to vouchers, help families navigate the city's early childhood system, and fund research to discover the barriers families face to accessing care. New York City is also implementing a 15% differential payment to providers serving children during non-traditional hours. To drive supply, New York City launched the Child Care Center property tax abatement earlier this year, and nearly 2,000 seats have been created. In support of this work and Local Law 105, the New York City Department of Health also launched an FAQ for property owners regarding the facility requirements for a child care program. The administration agrees that continuity of care is important for both the child and the family's well-being. Last year, we successfully advocated to the state to increase the authorization for child care assistance from 12 months to 24 months. We are in the process of working with ACS, New York City Public Schools, the Department of Social Services, and OTI to implement this change later this year. In addition, we are also in the process of adding the recertification application for assistance to the My City portal. This will make it easier for families to submit their recertification packet by reducing the administrative burden of a paper application. We recognize the incredible dedication and work of our child care and early childhood workforce. They have educated hundreds of thousands of children and are the backbone of our city's education and economy. They kept their doors open during the pandemic, serving first responders while being first responders. Families rely on them every day, every hour, to not just keep their child safe and healthy, but to promote their social and emotional development and help them prepare for kindergarten and beyond. As stated in the blueprint, this administration will continue to focus on both strengthening the business and administrative needs of providers, but also their professional goals. We are excited to begin the work on the 3-year child care grant pilot in accordance with Local Law 104 and look forward to giving the council an update in the coming weeks. This office is also a member of the Marshall Plan for Moms Task Force, focused on the early childhood ecosystem and the intersection of the caregiver and provider. There's still work to be done, as the work for children and families is constant. The Office of Child Care will soon go live with its own website. This will be a user-friendly platform for families, community-based organizations, and anyone who is interested in finding or sharing information for the early childhood sector. The goal of this platform is to provide timely, transparent, and relevant information to the public. We look forward to continuing to discuss the bill with Council. The Blueprint celebrated its 1-year anniversary in June, and for this office, it's an opportunity to continue engaging our stakeholders. We will continue to assess the progress of the goals of the current Blueprint and advance the goals that need further development. All of this work sits firmly on the foundation of collaboration and partnership throughout the city. In addition to convening city agencies like New York City Public Schools, ACS, DSS, DOHMH, and more, it is imperative that this Office of Child Care continues to approach this work in collaboration with families, educators, community-based organizations, advocacy groups, and the early childhood networks and the private sector throughout the city. Our office looks forward to continued collaboration with City Council. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we have been joined by Council Members Menin and Vernikov. I have a question for you real quick, actually. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I just want to start talking a little bit about implementation. In February 2023, Mayor Adams announced the creation of the Office for Child Care and Early Childhood Development. How has that office improved, or how has it improved access to child care across the city so far? I know that you talked a little bit, not a little bit, you talked quite a bit about that in your testimony, but specifically, I'd like to know what communities the office has been most active in. Is there do you have the data? You talked about how many families have been served a little bit, but do you have demographics of the population served? Is there data on how many families are being left out?
Sure. So just to reframe, our office does not provide direct service. We are actually a city agency that supports the city agencies that do the direct service. Right now, our goal is to assist all of the children in all of the districts and all of the boroughs throughout the city. We have taken a targeted approach and have worked with ACS and New York City Public Schools, in particular with 17 identified council districts that need additional support for recruitment, marketing, advertising, connecting, and assessing. We don't have that data for you in front of us today, but we'll happily get those demographics to you.
That would be great. I'd love to know what those 17 council districts are, or which of those are. And you said you don't have any of sort of the other demographic data. What is availability versus demand look like from y'all's perspective?
Availability first starts with awareness of the program options that are across the city for families. Awareness for us is the cornerstone and the first step for families to identify what options are available in their school districts, in their communities, in their neighborhoods. Accessibility versus availability is really contingent on the programs that are located in those specific neighborhoods. So, for example, are there enough early Head Start or Head Start seats versus pre-K versus universal pre-K versus extended day, extended seats. So we would really have to look at the ethos of the community that we're specifically talking about, for example, a zip code, see how many seats are actually funded for that zip code versus the enrollment and engagement, and see what the vacancies are.
So, I mean, from what I'm hearing is that there are multiple different barriers for, that may come into play for certain folks in childcare being readily available for their child, right? So taking into account all of those different barriers, would it be fair to say that demand outpaces the practical availability at this moment?
I don't know if it outpaces it. I think there's an opportunity for our office to make stronger connections so that families do see what's available and what's accessible versus the capacity and enrollment in the current neighborhoods.
And in terms of forward-looking, right? Like, is there an understanding by the office of what future demand might look like?
Well, we're assessing that now. We're looking at what is available. We have to look at different demographics like birth, records of how many children are born each year that would actually involve and bring out what the capacity needs are for infants and toddlers, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, how many families are moving between different districts, different boroughs. So there's an opportunity for us to start researching that demographic information for sure.
And I want to shift a little bit to specifically children who are living in our shelter system. Universal child care, it requires ensuring that kids living in shelters have access, and unfortunately, children living in our city shelters disproportionately miss out on child care and early childhood education programs and services, even though families in shelter don't need to meet the usual work requirements in order to be eligible for that subsidized child care. So obviously, it's a plus, right? We're pleased that the mayor's blueprint stated the importance of increasing outreach and enrollment efforts with families in shelter and temporary housing. But what efforts, if any, has the city taken to let families living in shelter know about the early child care and education programs and support them in applying? Can you tell us about the current efforts and the future plans?
Sure. So one of the barriers that we identified was families not knowing which programs they were eligible for and where they were. And that was also supported by the workers, the employees at the temporary housing and shelters, actually also learning how to navigate the different options for this, within the system, within the ecosystem. So our office actually created a manual that outlines all of the eligibility criteria and the program model types that are available across the city, especially for those who are living in shelter or in temporary housing. My colleague, Deputy Mayor, I just promoted you. Deputy Director Goddess.
Congratulations.
Was integral in creating that manual. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more.
Yeah, and specific questions is for that is like, is that manual in every single shelter or temporary housing setting? Are shelter workers being trained in that protocol? Is it part of the intake process? At what point? How often is it brought to people?
Sure. Tova Gottesman, Deputy Director for the Mayor's Office of Child Care. So we distributed that guide to DHS and to H&H and to HPD. And those are great questions and points, and what we can do is follow up with them to understand how they've been implementing it. We just issued it like a few weeks ago to them, and so we wanted to make sure that certainly the staff at DHS, are socialized with the various income, reason for care requirements, but those are all really good points, and we'll be sure to follow up on what implementation looks like, because I think there's absolutely opportunity to train the workers at the shelters on helping families navigate the city's child care system.
All right, thank you.
Our office, to answer a little bit more detail, office also reached out to the Head Start Regional Office at 26 Federal Plaza. Those children in those living parameters are eligible for early Head Start and Head Start. So we wanted to make sure that the information that we were sharing for training and technical assistance was current, up to date. So it just was another opportunity for our office to show partnership across sectors to make sure that the families do have the information, to make sure the staff does have the information, and make those connections, and not just hand them a piece of paper, but have the staff really internalize what the process looks and what the options are.
And how do y'all consider the impending 15% pegs affecting the ability to execute exactly that?
Right. So, it's a little bit early for us to respond to that because the PEG, process is still underway, and we will definitely take into consideration everything in terms of any kind of reductions, but we don't know what the PEG is going to look like right now.
I think even thinking about and talking to community members, advocates, caretakers, parents, providers, it seems really clear that interagency coordination is going to be super critical to enrolling more children living in shelters and childcare and early childhood programs. And so I have like a direct ask is if the Office of Child Care and Early Childhood Education would commit to holding a meeting next month to bring together the different agencies that operate shelters and the agencies that run early childhood programs to discuss a strategy for increasing access to that care, to living in shelters. And then could you report back to us on the outcomes of such a meeting?
Okay, thank you. Noted.
Oh, I'm asking if y'all would commit to doing
I'm sorry,
that.
I said yes. Noted.
Okay, great, beautiful.
I was writing
love
my
that.
notes. Yes.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
So, in keeping with past practice, New York City Public Schools recently matched every age-eligible child living in a DHS shelter with a 3K or pre-K site if they did not yet have a seat, even if the family didn't apply. However, we want to understand how many families don't yet know about those offers. So, when we talk about the plan to let those shelters know, I know that you sort of outlined it on a high level, but have you spoken to DHS and NYCPS to like develop a specific plan? Like, what are the next steps? Like, how are you viewing the timeline?
I don't think I understand the question. Connecting.
So, like, what is the practical plan for making sure that every age-eligible child living in a DHS shelter is matched with a 3K or pre-K site? Because, in keeping with past practice, that was done even if the parent didn't proactively apply for such a seat. And so, making sure that continues to happen. Is there currently a plan in place?
So New York City Public Schools does have targeted recruitment plans for children living in shelter. I could defer back to them and get the specifics of that plan, but that's something that's being implemented.
That would be great. I have lots more questions, but I also want to make sure that my colleagues, I won't look that way anymore. It's empty. Oh, okay. I'm like, wait, where'd they go? Have an opportunity to ask questions.
Sure.
So I'll pass it over to Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you, and thank you, Michelle. I'm certainly encouraged by hearing all the things that you are looking to accomplish this Office of Child Care, and thank you for making the distinction about what the role of the Office of Child Care is. So I'd just like to ask some follow-ups pertaining to that. Can you share how the Office of Child Care will support, in this case, I believe DOE, in supporting their daycares in retaining staff?
So our office right now, we see ourselves as the conveners of several different city agencies, including New York City Public Schools. I know that there's a recruitment plan in place for the workforce in general, but we also have an opportunity to work with external partners and convening and connecting entities like the Daycare Council, Head Start Sponsoring Board, who do have contracts with New York City Public Schools. I think it's an opportunity for us to make sure that everyone is at the table talking together. I know that currently OLR is in conversations with Daycare Council, right? Daycare Council in terms of contract negotiations. So, in respect for that, I can't really talk about what that bargaining is looking like right now. But our office can definitely, from our perspective, at least bring people together to make sure that we're working towards the same goals, which is to retain early childhood staff in community-based organizations, especially.
I don't know if you got to see the report that the Daycare Council put out this week, 30-plus pages, really comprehensive, really extensive, but something that really resonated with me was the realities of these community-based providers and the challenges they have in retaining staff. The average staff, there's a turnover within 5 years. And I can speak to this in my district. These anchor organizations like Nuestros Niños and Bushwick United will have a team of 2 or 3 providers who can stay for 10, 15 years, but that's not the reality for everyone else. So it's a big concern. It's something that in Intro 941, we were hoping to expand on what are the realities for these daycares and how vital it is to retain that staff. I've also heard from daycares who said they can't afford to keep good people. And you highlighted them, the contract negotiations that the Daycare Council is facing now. Pay parity is huge. It's something that's in the bill as well. How does the Office of Child Care intend on supporting pay parity in a longer term?
I think This office tremendously respects the workforce, especially those in community-based organizations that that do have the pay disparities. Our office is to support the process. Our office is in a position to continue to advocate from the perspective of making sure that the workforce is strengthened and sustained. Our office is in position to be a thought partner with all of the stakeholders to talk about what does pay parity look like and how does it impact community-based organizations. We can't have an early childhood system without all of the stakeholders available, engaged, and compensated correctly. So we're looking forward to seeing what those contract negotiations look like, to see if, the conversations can continue to support that workforce and the pay parity pathway.
Well, I hope that the office does take the position of supporting it. I mean, you all know the majority of the folks filling these positions are women of color, that certainly deserve pay parity with their DOE counterparts. On the topic of DOE, how does the office intend on supporting DOE make on-time payments to providers?
Well, right now, our office has been inserted into different parts of that process. New York City Public Schools is the gatekeeper for that invoicing payment process. However, we have been available to connect community-based organizations that are having particular issues with their invoicing. We've been in conversations and at the table when discussing any kind of processing and processing improvements to make sure that the payments are being sent on time. We've been in conversations with New York City Public Schools and other entities within the city agencies to see if there are any technical improvements to help the process. So we are embedded in conversation, and we are dedicated to making those connections between the CBOs and New York City Public Schools, and we're also deeply in the conversation of holding folks accountable, if you will, to make sure that this process continues to progress and improve.
What has the feedback been? The council hosted a hearing last June, I believe, regarding this very same topic with the Education Committee. Can you share any measures of accountability you are all looking into? What has the feedback been?
So our accountability right now is anecdotal. I would have to go back and actually look at hard data to see where the improvements are. Anecdotally, we have seen improvements. Anecdotally, we've been able to connect community-based organizations that were struggling. Part of that narrative is for CBOs to actually understand all the mechanics that go into the invoicing. Another part of that conversation is having New York City Public School understanding some of the difficulties and the barriers on the other side of the conversation. So we would be able to touch base with New York City Public Schools to see what their invoicing payment rate would be. I don't have that information.
Okay. I wanted to ask questions. So something that you touched upon that if you can expand, that'd be great, regarding the realities our communities have with daycare deserts. Certainly my co-sponsor, Kevin Riley, and I talked about that at length in his borough of the Bronx, kind of the realities of where the need is versus where these institutions exist. You mentioned that the Office of Daycare has put together some sort of or is working on some kind of a plan so that it can be easier for folks to access? Is that correct? Did I hear that right?
Yeah. So the accessibility for us, again, started with awareness, and we supported the campaign for It Takes a City. But access also in terms of the application that lives on My City. The thing that's really exciting for us is that we're now going to be able to track data to see who's enrolling in what zip codes, what communities, so that we now have information we will soon have information to say, you know what, Community District 17 looks like they didn't get too many applications. Do we have to do a more targeted marketing plan? This district seems to be oversaturated with applications. How do we work with ACS and New York City Public Schools to really make data-informed decisions and help them influence where seats need to be and if there's any extra support. One of the questions that came up recently was about available commercial space that can be converted to childcare centers. We will be able to get that information on vacant spaces, but we would also have to couple that with a partnership with Department of Health to see what's a viable space. So a storefront might be vacant, but we would have to make sure that it was a safe space.
Right. Does DOB play a role in
They would
this
play
process?
a role if they are going to contract with a community-based organization to run that. So Department of Health is really the body that looks at spaces to see if there's a viability for childcare centers to run.
And Michelle, on the piece about the data, I think that's great. A vast majority of the bills we pass here at council is requiring the DOE to provide more data. Who is working on all the data that you just mentioned?
So New York City Public Schools definitely is working on their data. Our liaison, Aaron Yarbrough, is here. He is I call him my data guru. And I don't know if you wanted to speak a little bit about some of the work that you're doing with the data. Sure. Yeah, press that.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Hello, council members. Aaron Yarbrough, a senior project manager of data management. To build on that, like a lot of what our office is doing is getting data. The data comes from other sources, to your point. It comes there, we try to get DOE data. We try to look at that and compare that to ACS data with vouchers. We try to look and compare that to DOHMH data as far as, some of the buildings that they're inspecting. So we're gathering data from all these various agencies, and we're trying to sort of look at correlations between them, right? Because if you look at just any one of them, it's not going to try to give you the whole picture. So a lot of our challenges, but I think we are going to get there where we've made some strides, is to try to really look at this holistically with these multiple data sources, because now any one of them is only going to tell a fraction of the story. And part of that, as we look through it, is identifying where we need more data, right?
Are you taking suggestions?
I am.
I'll come up with it before the end of the hearing. No, for real. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I believe you. I think it's a real important part of this process. We've hit the year mark. A lot of it was establishing those protocols. Where does this data reside? And I think for many of you who have dealt with data before, sometimes it's not as simple as it looks. Is this a distinct individual? Is this a service count? We go through all of that. But I think part of, as this office matures and as our initiative, continues to gain momentum, it is looking at not only enriching the data we have and better understanding it and sort of mapping the correlations between them, but identifying where more data is necessary.
Thank you.
And to that point, being able to make intentional decisions and informed decisions. It's not just collecting data for data's sake, but it's like, what is this information telling us? How do we use it so that we can continue to serve more children and families throughout the city? So it's not data for data's sake. It's really the intention. We're at a really good position to look at this from a bird's eye view, where before the data was important, but it may have been in isolation. We're able to look at it in an aggregate and say, you know what? We need to come up with a strategy for this data set because it's telling us something. So we're actually really excited about that.
And so before I pass it over to my colleague, I actually just want to follow up on a little bit about the data that Councilmember Gutierrez was asking about. And you had mentioned, we're not doing data for data's sake, and so that kind of leads into the follow-ups of, what type of, I'd love to hear the examples, what type of data are you already currently producing to measure the impact, and how, what's the time frame, right? What are the formulas you're using? How often are you assessing the program to look for ways to improve it? Does it happen at specified junctures? Does it happen as you see an outlier or discrepancy or an issue with the data? And then I want to ask you about some of the data points, but curious as to those first.
Sure. So, Aaron, keep me honest, but right now, as mentioned, over 16,000 applications for vouchers on My City. What we're able to do now, we're just now at a point where we have enough data to look at some of the desegregated information. So, who's applying where? We're interested in seeing what zip codes have higher application rates versus others. So those are some things that we're interested in looking at. We're looking at the ages of children that are applying. We're going to start looking at the vouchers. Are they being used in contracted care with New York City public schools, or are they being used in private ACS voucher center-based locations? Are they being taken to home-based locations? So those are the things that we anticipate being able to look at and assess, and then turnkey that information and share it amongst our colleagues at the city, different city agencies, to say, you know, we're seeing this trend here. We're really excited about this trend. We're seeing this trend here. We're a little bit concerned, and we need to do a little bit more work.
And is there data on the average cost of childcare in New York City for families broken down by income bracket?
I'm not sure. Do we have that? We're not capturing that yet. No.
Okay. Is that something that you plan to try to capture in the future?
It's definitely a possibility. We haven't really had an internal discussion about that particular data set.
I mean, at least I think it would make sense in you know, figuring out sort of what the need is and what kinds of resources are going to be needed. Do you have statistics on the number of vacant commercial and community spaces in New York City that could potentially be converted into childcare facilities?
I think what we can do is get the number of vacant facilities. The harder number is to ascertain if those are viable spaces, because they would have to go through a rigorous viability assessment in partnership with Department of Health.
Okay, but you do think that those are perhaps?
I think there's.
Yeah.
I do think there are opportunities to look at vacant spaces. It's tricky because, you know, some of the spaces are older than others and have, you know, one of the major things is two means of egress. You have to have two, you know, places to enter and exit. A lot of commercial spaces don't have that because they were not built out for that modality of business. So it would take a lot of coordination with Department of Health, because they issue the licenses, to see if any of those spaces are viable.
And what about locations that have gotten tax breaks for offering community space that still hasn't been filled?
Say the question again.
What about spaces, right? The locations where they were offered tax breaks, right, in development for offering community space, and that community space still hasn't been filled?
Well, I know that I think approximately 2,000 seats have been created. We don't have the demographics on the negative side of that, so we could probably look into that.
Right. I don't think, yeah. Okay, and the last question I'm going to ask on this is if you could share what the average wait time for families seeking subsidized child care services are in New York City, and how does it vary by neighborhood?
Sure. The average wait time for voucher eligibility and determination is about 35 days. That's been a little bit of a increased wait time because of the volume of applications that are coming in through My City. So ACS is in the process of assessing what the need would be to actually shrink that down back to 30 days or under.
It does seem based on that demand is increasing, right? You're getting
Correct.
more applications in.
Correct.
And in order to reduce that wait time, fair to say that what you would need is more people
Staffing
processing?
and process analysis. Are there any gaps in the current process
Yeah.
that could be, you know, abbreviated, eliminated, reworked, or
Yeah.
you know, something to that nature? So I know ACS is working on.
Okay, yeah. And again, I mean, I would imagine that increasing staffing to reduce wait times would be difficult if your agencies were facing 15%.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. I'm going to pass it over to Councilmember Menin, who is the prime sponsor of a resolution that we are hearing today. She can tell you more about it, and then I know she has some questions as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Caban, for holding today's important hearing on childcare. And I also want to thank my colleague, Councilmember Gutierrez, for her great advocacy and leadership on childcare and for her bill. So childcare remains obviously a crisis for New Yorkers, second only to housing costs. Childcare expenses are one of the biggest concerns to all parents across New York City. As reported in the New York Times last week, a family would need to make at least $300,000 per year to meet the federal standard for child care affordability for only one child, yet a typical New York City household earns around $70,000 per year. That is why I was proud to have my Universal Child Act signed into law earlier in 2022. This package of legislation, which includes, as you mentioned, a child care advisory board, a grant pilot program to benefit providers on the brink of closure, a bill to create a subsidy portal, and a bill to list all the different child care providers, was obviously designed to ensure that child care can be more affordable and accessible for all New Yorkers. Today's hearing on this important topic also includes 2 resolutions that I'm proud to sponsor. Reso 560, which has the support of Chair Caban, thank you, calls on the state to remove the minimum wage and hours requirement for applicants of child care. Currently, New York state law excludes certain applicants, such as home health aides or gig workers, from being awarded child care subsidies because of the amount of hours worked in a week or due to hourly wage requirements. This law clearly needs to be updated so that all categories of workers could receive child care assistance. In addition, I have Reso 561, which calls on the state to create a tax credit that incentivizes employers to provide daycare for their employees. Investing in child care means investing in working families and the economy, yet a family living in New York City typically spends over a quarter of their income for child care alone, which is completely unacceptable. So I just wanted to ask, if I could, just a couple questions. I was going through yesterday the mayor's management report, and it reports that in fiscal year 23, 1,900 seats were created by 19 eligible property owners taking advantage of the state's tax abatement program. I had a bill earlier that was signed into law that talked about this tax abatement program, and that was supposed to give guidance to property owners to make sure that they are doing this. The goal in fiscal year 24 is to increase it to 11,000 seats. What else can be done to get to that number?
We have to continue to work with our advocacy groups and private sector partners to make sure that private building owners are aware of the tax abatement and tax credit, and to make sure that our office is centered in part of those conversations. I know that there is an information packet that's available. That's why we were able to get to that number. We hope to support the private sector and making them aware of the credit of opening a child care center within their building. So we're looking at partnership. Advocacy, marketing are probably the cornerstones of that.
And one thing I just wanted to note, when I was going through the MMR, it said that 19 eligible property owners created 1,900 seats, which that would be equate to an average of 100 seats per facility. Is that correct?
I would have to go back and
because that seemed very high to me. I don't think most facilities have 100 seats. So.
Yeah, I would have to go back and
okay, if you could please let us know, that would be very helpful.
No problem.
So how many childcare providers exist currently in New York City? Obviously, we know in recent years, under the data, over 1,000 have closed in recent years. What are the numbers today? We've got childcare deserts, as we all know, all over the city. So I'm deeply concerned about the number of providers.
Sure. I would have to get back to you. I don't have the number of open early childhood centers right now in front of me.
And how many are listed in the portal? The portal that has been created,
Sure.
How many providers are listed in the portal?
So I can reach back to Department of Health, who maintains that portal. The idea is to have every licensed Department of Health licensed center. I know New York City Public Schools also has a map, and home-based childcare can be found in the OCFS portal. So we could get more information about that.
Can you also give us an update on the background checks? There's obviously been a long lag in background checks that we know up to a year at the Department of Health. With the absolute tragedy, unspeakable tragedy that happened in the Bronx, what is happening on background checks, and is there better coordination between the Department of Ed and the Department of Health? Because we found in the past there wasn't that level of coordination that needs to happen. So
Sure.
what is happening on that?
So the comprehensive background clearances shifted in terms of regulations back in 2019 per federal guidelines. It required many more steps to the process that existed for New York City. Months after that was announced, we were in the middle of the pandemic. So some of the efforts to move towards the automated system were paused. We're happy to say that in May, late May, we have worked very closely with the Department of Health to ensure that this comprehensive background clearance process is now an automated online system where both the community-based organizations and the potential employee that's trying to get a position at those centers are working in partnership to make sure all the paperwork and necessary steps are happening. The process time we could get for you, but it is not months, it's weeks at this point, and we are approaching 3,000 candidates, if you will, that have applied for CBC are now cleared to work, and that is a pretty significant increase. That means that those people are now able to join the workforce. If they're able to join the workforce, that means we can open classrooms, and if we can open classrooms, we can get more children in.
Right.
So that is the cornerstone of the work that we kept that front and center in mind. We worked really closely with Department of Health to make sure that the system is as intuitive as possible. We engage community-based organizations that actually have to use this tool to make sure that they have staff that are cleared to work in the centers. So we're happy to continue that work, and we're working on systems improvement.
Last question, if I could. So in the
Sure.
situation in the Bronx, my understanding is that there's 7,000 at-home childcare meaning people operating the childcare facility in their own home. There are about 7,000 in New York City, is my understanding. So in that situation in the Bronx, do the inspectors in the health department have to check every bedroom in a home facility? Is that one of the required items on the checklist?
I really can't speak to their specific protocols. We could circle back to Department of Health and get that. I'm also cautioning, commenting on an open investigation, but I'd be happy to find out what their protocol is for visiting.
I just want to
home-based
understand
providers.
if every room,
Sure.
because if every room is not required, then that's something we should look at, expanding that requirement to make sure that every room is being looked at in a home facility. So, I just want to know if it's on the inspector checklist or not. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to ask
you.
questions.
Thank you,
Thank
Council.
you. Really appreciate it.
Just to follow up on some of Councilmember Menin's questions, I think it would be really good for us to know sort of what the protocol is, what role the office plays in monitoring and evaluating these facilities, including sort of the specifics of the inspections and evaluations. That would be helpful. I'm a little disappointed that y'all weren't able to provide the number of childcare providers currently selected and licensed in New York City, because I think that's a critical piece of information in the context of what we're discussing. So really would like to make sure that we get that.
Yep.
And wanted to touch and go back to actually another thing that was brought up by Councilmember Menin. Can you talk a little bit about the process of opening a child care center? What barriers and challenges do they currently face in doing that?
Sure. So I guess the first question is, our office doesn't have a monitoring function, but we are very invested in making sure that early childhood programs across the city reflect high quality health and safety. But our responsibility in terms of monitoring does not lie within our office. Right now, Department of Health holds the article in the city, which is the contract or the guideline, if you will, to opening and operating. Article 47 highlights several different components, from staffing requirements, space requirements, and other important components within that document that regulate. If you are a community-based organization that is also connected to, let's say, a New York City public school early childhood contract, or if you are a direct grantee for Early Head Start or Head Start, you also have to comply with other regulatory requirements within those contracts. And between those two or three or multiple entities, this should support a healthy and viable early childhood environment. There are other city agencies that also support the viability of programs, including FDNY. They are really very active in making sure fire panels and fire safety is in place. Department of Buildings also is another partner with Department of Health. New York City Housing Authority, if the program is located in one of the New York City Housing Authority communities. So it really is a collaborative effort, but in terms of compliance and oversight that does lie within Department of Health.
Okay. And I know I sound like a broken record on this,
sorry.
but again, it sounds like it takes a lot of manpower and multiple agency coordination, and I do not know how we accomplish that with 15% PEGs. I'm going to pass it over again to Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair. Can you share how big is the Office of Child Care? What are we looking at?
It's the three of us.
Oh, the whole office is here today.
The whole office
Wonderful.
is here.
What are, in touching on Chair Caban's reference to these, harmful pegs, what does that look like for you?
we
What
are
does a 5% reduction in November look like for the office right now?
for our office. Well, we're part of the strategic initiative portfolio, and I know that we're going to have to work together to see how that PEG is going to reflect it for the portfolio. We're still in the process of making those evaluations, so I really can't speak to the direct impact to our office. But we're a team of three. We have a very lean budget. It's mostly no OTPS right now. We're really fortunate to have collaborations with a lot of city agencies to get our work done. So we're really interested in being able to support the strategic initiative portfolio, and we'll be part of that PEG conversation. But it's a little bit too early to tell right now.
Well, a number of us are gravely concerned with, some of our other more traditional agencies and their ability to keep New Yorkers safe. I mean, it boils down to like DOB not even being able to retain inspectors, right? And so that's why I asked about DOB earlier, because I think, we can feel encouraged. I'm glad that the administration agrees with us with this bill on the points that matter. But when you're proposing PEGs, you're working against all of those goals, and all it does is push this further and further into the future. And I just don't believe that New Yorkers can afford to wait. I don't think our providers can afford to wait. So looking forward to hearing from you all what this office is going to look like in November, prelim and executive again. I have some questions or suggestions, if you can answer them, about the kind of data.
Sure.
So something that Chair Caban touched on was the community facility space. I know you're not prepared to talk about that, but something that happens, especially in like rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods, is the conversations about redevelopment and these tax subsidies that these developers get. And I see it in Williamsburg, I see it in Los Sures, I see it in Bushwick, where they're getting these massive tax breaks. Not only are apartments vacant because no one can afford them, but their facility space that they're required to provide vacant. And so it doesn't designate community facility space for childcare centers, really, right? So what is something for you all to think about in how you all can work with the city to help mandate that? I think that's really important. Oftentimes developers don't go into business with childcare providers that are providing subsidies because they can't, it doesn't make fiscal sense to them. But that has to be the last priority in communities that are gentrifying, that are still very much in need of affordable childcare options, or in childcare desert. So would love for that to with your office of 3 or more, to look
Just
into
us
that.
3.
I know. Stop saying it's just you. It's you, and we'll do it. The other place, and that also just ties into the bill, which is also seeking for collaboration on planning for facility space designation, specifically for daycares. Can you all speak to daycare facilities that have been closed in the last year? I mean, around a year ago, I know Sheltering Arms closed a number of locations, one of which were in my district. But what happens in those instances? What role does your office play in daycare centers that are they're about to shutter their doors? What does the city then do to utilize those spaces afterwards?
Right. So again, not providing direct service gives us the opportunity to partner with the funding sources. So whether it's a direct federal grant or a New York City public school or any other kind of funding structure that would impact budgets and contracts, I think we're in a space to offer collaborative conversations. If there are many reasons why a program would close, and I don't have the specifics on, you had mentioned sheltering arms, but there are several reasons why any business, including a child care center, would close. I think our priority from my vantage point as the executive director of this office is to make sure that families are connected to childcare. If a center does have to close, we don't want the continuity of care to get interrupted. So that would be the first priority for us. Fortunately, in our 8 months of being in office, we haven't been directly confronted with a center saying, we're about to shutter our doors, can you help us? But we know that there are stories out there. And
They are closing. Are they going to DOE for that?
I would assume they're not coming directly to our office, so maybe they're going to their funding source, which in some cases would be New York City Public Schools. In other cases, it might be Head Start or private entities, but they haven't come specifically to us to say, Michelle, we're getting ready to close. What can you do? We have been in conversations with several community-based organizations and happily have been able to convene and connect really important conversations to prevent a closing. Not that programs were close to closing, but really trying to help troubleshoot some of these really important budget questions and invoicing questions and enrollment questions, making sure that the registration opportunities for students are in the right place, category, worked with a handful between my deputy director and myself, just taking phone calls, setting up meetings, and making sure that the community voice is heard and that they have another consistent and reliable city group directly connected to and has access to New York City Public Schools and really helping those conversations.
Thank you. Do you all have a sense of how many providers are in need of childcare themselves? And whether they, in those instances, would even qualify for childcare at the locations that they work at?
Yeah, I don't have that information, but that's definitely something that we could probably work with advocacy groups to try to get that data. I mean, it's really an important question because if you're talking about salary, disparities and concerns, I'm sure that there is additional connections that we can make to the workforce, not just in compensation, but also connecting folks to childcare throughout the city.
I mean, I bring it because it's a very real example in my community, and of a daycare director that had to leave because they couldn't qualify, and even if they did qualify, there was a waiting list of 300 or so kids that have aged out, and so that's a reality. Sorry, can I ask 2 more questions?
You can ask as many as you want.
I forgot that other people are here. How often are you all is your office thinking about asking agencies to collect data? And obviously it depends on what is the kind of data, for example, like DOHMH for birth trends, but what are you all thinking as far as how often are you all asking them to gather and release this data? Like and to integrate that into your planning?
Sure. So I'll also pass the data question over to Aaron in a second. But in general, since our office is really at the beginning stages of forming these really consistent cadences of meeting with folks, we're probably going to ask for consistent reporting on things like enrollment. We have access to some data and some information, but we'll also rely on folks like Department of Health to show us how many applications for the background clearances are in, how many are processed, how many were rejected, things like that. We could ask for a regular cadence for that information. We're looking forward to having regular cadence information accessible through My City in terms of the voucher applications and acceptances and connecting children to care. So there are many opportunities for us to either request data quarterly, monthly, or even have access to the data directly so that we don't have to wait for it. So we're looking forward to, putting together a timeline with intentionality. Did you want to add anything?
Just add to that, and I'm sure something I'm aware of is that's right, and we'd love it to be apples to apples as much as possible. So we're really striving to Does monthly make sense? But it really does depend on the data source. Like some of those could be real time. Like we could go into my city and say how many people have applied through my city. That's a real time thing. Other times there's a lag when you really start trying to get outcomes, like how many applications have been approved for background checks and such. There's often a lag because there's processing time. So it's not only coordinating the frequency, which I think is really important, and we'd like to sort of routinize it as much as possible, but trying to be mindful that sometimes there's going to be a lag in the data, and so when we're comparing it, just make sure that that's noted, because sometimes you're going to see April data next to May just because of the data frequency. In my world, I would like to make it as standard as possible, and that should be the goal. Or things again like census data, you have to wait.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I raised that question because I want to segue into 3K. I think for many of us here, we were and continue to be deeply disappointed by the inability of this administration to believe what we know is true, which is expanding 3K is vital. And I mean it in the very real way, where I know of families that have opted to stay out of the city because of just hearing these announcements, right? Just like 3K is not going to be expanded. I can't afford it, so I'm definitely not going back. And I think, again, that's counterintuitive to what this mayor has said. So what we learned at one of the education hearings was that what they understood from very preliminary rounds of data collection were that there was some, misdistributions of enrollment seats, where we had certain districts where they were empty versus ones that were in need. What can you tell me about how this data is being collected now? Has the system improved? What can you share about where is the need actually? What has changed from what we knew 6 months ago?
I think that is correct. To underscore, New York City Public Schools is assessing and has made adjustments to some of their seat allocations based on some of the research that they were able to conduct. So the data is guiding informed decision making. What we would need to do is work in partnership with public schools to actually get that information on a regular basis, because it will help continue that narrative of, yes, we're understanding that in this community there's a need, and this community there are vacancies, and how do we take that information collectively to make intentional decisions. So I think it would be important for our office. We meet with public schools regularly, but to say, this is an intentional data set that's going to help us make decisions, I think that's a really critical next and continued step.
Yeah, and I think I know parents in my community that couldn't make a 3K enrollment, meaning they maxed out and are hopping on a train 40 minutes away. So that, to me, is not us meeting that need. That is a parent taking matters into their own hands and, doing what they need to do, which is, I think, the opposite of what this administration should be doing, and certainly the opposite of what this council wants to do. Have you all thought about the role that expanding eligibility for 0 to 3 at this point looks like? I've heard from a lot of folks in my district, it is insanely, childcare is expensive, right? You know this. Without a subsidy, it's almost impossible. What can we do, or what is your office looking to do to expand the way that middle income families can become eligible? What are their options?
Yeah, I think the foundation of our approach is really rooted in advocacy for state and federal partnership. Millions and billions of dollars are going to be needed to expand early childhood in a way that is really needed for the city. And without that advocacy, without that partnership between the federal government and the state governments, we won't be able to accomplish all of our goals in a timely fashion. So we are here to continue to advocate for different components of different, statutes and bills, and advocacy has to continue in order for us to get the funding that we need to expand.
Thank you. You said this in your opening remarks, Michelle. It's in our bill 941 about non-conventional hours. This, and I had this experience when I was looking for childcare for my daughter. I was on a waiting list. I'm very grateful. Shout out First Buddies. They're wonderful. But the what I learned in that, like, and literally what I was doing was just calling different daycares that I saw like online. But there's no uniformity of hours, right? Which is a problem for someone working like conventional hours. But then the realities of like people who work outside of 9 to 5, who are working weekends. I know the city, it was a lot easier to find these daycare centers where, you could do evening and weekend drop off. A lot of those places I think have either closed or stopped providing services at those times. But it's very real now. Now we have a lot more families that are working multiple jobs, multiple people in the household. What is your office doing to help solve, or support agencies to help solve for that? How can we ensure that we have these locations in every community district?
So I think awareness is where we are in position to make the biggest impact right now.
Do these places exist though?
There are places that have non-traditional hours. There are not a lot.
No,
there are not a lot.
I mean, do you have a sense of what?
I would have to look up the specific numbers, but
There's a directory specifically.
Yeah, is there a directory specifically?
There's not a directory for just non-traditional hours.
Or however we want to word them, but hours outside of, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, you were saying.
No.
education.
So I think awareness of the differential. I think that if providers have the resources and understanding of what it would mean fiscally to run a non-traditional hour program, I think we're in a really good position to start convening with, especially early childhood advocates, New York City public schools, or anyone who holds contracts for childcare, whether it's center-based or home-based. I think this is an opportunity for us to continue that conversation and come up with intentional pathways for parents to get connected to programs that have non-traditional hours. My children are adults now, but it's very clear and fresh, the conversation that you're having with us today about trying to find childcare. And, you don't think non-traditional hours for teachers, but if I have to be in front of my classroom at 8, that means I need childcare at 7. And that is considered a non-traditional hour. So I do personally and professionally understand, that angst of trying to get connected.
Thank you. And I think, in speaking very preliminary conversations with labor even, and the nurses union, and they're very much in support of this bill for these reasons. They want to, or, I've heard from other unions that they want to be able to attract and retain more women laborers. And this is a key ask of those folks. Do you want to take, I have like a couple more. I think the chair should ask the questions. I'm not done though, but I'm almost.
It's actually Chair Gutiérrez.
No.
And honestly, I'm super grateful. And the reason why I'm like, take up all the space you'd like is because Councilmember Gutiérrez has done so much work and has worked so closely with the ecosystem of advocates, organizations, parents, childcare providers. There's really nobody better to be digging in on these questions. I did, just before I pass it back over to you, I wanted to ask some questions, particularly about our undocumented children and families. Promise NYC is an incredible thing. Many of us fought very, very hard to make sure it happened. I know that you mentioned that basically the continuation or the funding for the upcoming fiscal year that was secured takes the program in its first iteration and serves the same number of children, but at that full 12 months rather than the 6 or 7 months that was able to be provided the first time around. So I know that it's like 600 plus children currently being serviced by this program. It's an incredible program, but my question is, how many children applied for a Promise NYC voucher before June 30th? How many applied after June 30th? And how many unused vouchers? There are no unused vouchers, right? We're like at capacity, but how many applied before? How many applied after?
I would have to reach back out in partnership with ACS to see if they are able to drill down before and after June 30th enrollment.
And I'm going to continue to advocate for
is it application or enrollment.
Applications.
Application, okay.
Yeah, applicants, because we know how many are enrolled,
Sure.
and we know how many seats can be supported by the allotment that's been made available. But I think about the fact that we had a hearing on. We actually had a couple of hearings addressing this, but the demand far outpaces what we are currently providing for folks. And even at the time we first begun talking about it, it was before we saw a really sustained uptick in welcoming new neighbors, undocumented neighbors seeking asylum. And so a few questions that I have too, and it all interacts with one another, because now we're hearing that not just single men in shelter settings being booted from our shelter system after 60 days, after 30 days, but that this rulemaking, this policy making might be extended to families with children being booted from the shelter system, which then makes it seem, cruel, let's just say that up front, but it then makes it even more critical for those families to be able to have their kids in a child care setting with that kind of housing instability. I know that was a little bit of a diatribe, but the question I have is, what are we doing to make sure that we are reaching and supporting asylum seeker families with children? How are you going to ensure that child care centers are equipped to take the children of asylum seeker families? Have y'all been thinking about that? What's the plan? What's the approach?
Definitely top of mind. Some of the work that we had already mentioned beforehand in terms of supporting shelter staff so that they are aware of the availability and the eligibility requirements.
And that includes respite centers and some of the emergency HERCs and...
Correct. And I'll pass it over to Deputy Director in a second to talk specifically about the work that we're doing with the HERCs. She's been leading that work in representation of our office. But the value statement that our office has is that children, regardless of immigration status, need to be connected to care. And there are options now that are available. First and top of mind for us are the families that are eligible for early Head Start and Head Start, whether it's a direct grant from the federal government or through the delegate contract of New York City Public Schools. Those families are eligible for early Head Start and Head Start programs. Public schools working together with different city agencies to make sure that children are connected to schools. 3K and pre-K school day seats are available for those families. And I'll pass it over to Deputy Director Gottesman to talk about the work that she's been doing with the staff, with the HERCs in particular.
So as Michelle mentioned, in addition to the guide that we've been giving out to all of the CBOs that are affiliated with DYCD, ACS, DOHMH, et cetera, also making sure that H&H, HPD, and DHS also have that same information. But maybe more importantly, or in addition, we're connecting CBOs on the ground to those shelters and to those HERCs to go meet families, have those warm interactions so they can share information about their programs that are nearby those HERCs and shelters. In addition, also, I know New York City Public Schools, Division of Early Childhood Education, they've also been at family resource fairs. They've also been tabling, making sure that families know about the availability of Head Start, about 3K, about pre-K. I think on the advocacy level, we need to look at the federal government and ask them to waive the qualified immigration status requirement for child care block grant. That would open up eligibility for vouchers. That would open up eligibility for infant toddler care, 3K, pre-K extended care, all of the care that's funded by the child care block grant. And so that is on our federal legislative agenda. We know it's part of advocates' agendas. And so welcome to work together in advocacy to the federal government to change that, because that would really open the door for a lot more options for families.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Jen?
Thank you. Michelle, I missed if you mentioned, how are y'all feeling? It's okay, right? We're doing all right. When is the office's website going to go live?
Oh, I would say in the next couple of months. Few weeks.
Who's is the website something that you all as an office working in-house, or is OTI doing that?
We're working in partnership with OTI.
Yeah.
Okay. Just saying, the My City portal was supposed to launch in the fall. It launched in March, so I'm excited. I'm just, I don't have high hopes for. You said in a couple weeks is what you said?
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
Yeah.
What's the color scheme? What do we?
Oh, we want to surprise you, but it's very playful.
You haven't seen it. Okay, so a couple weeks. So let's say before Thanksgiving.
Before Thanksgiving is fair.
Okay.
Yep.
And it's going to be up in multiple languages?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Can I ask about, I don't know what your role is here, but how are you all working, I guess, with DOE and supporting providers in, releasing a new RFP?
We have not had conversations with public schools right now about the RFP, but we hope to.
But it's an issue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And have you all thought about how to support DOE in situations where daycare centers are not in a space owned by the city of New York? Like, do you all have a sense of what that data is for, daycare centers that are in
A city-owned and
versus
city-leased.
the majority of mine are in privately owned, privately rented sites?
Yeah, we do have access to get the information about programs that are located in either city-owned or city-leased buildings and what that impact has on the location.
Okay, wonderful. I'd love to see that. I have deep concerns about, a number of daycares in my district. We had a fight in 2015. We might have to have another fight in another 2 years. So that's a reality. It's a reality for I think citywide, but especially in gentrifying neighborhoods or neighborhoods that are experiencing displacement at the rate that we are. And it's a serious threat to our communities, to the livelihoods for these families. So it doesn't sound like right now, but it's important that you think through how you plan to support those sites and DOE because, these landlords are getting, smarter and smarter. There's a lot more loopholes. There's a lot more money in condos than in leasing to the city to operate a daycare center. And the city needs to take a stand against real estate and say, we need to continue to support these institutions. And so I would love for the office to take a stance on that and work with me in my district particularly, but in any other community that is dealing with that. I think the last questions, if you could answer, like I mentioned before, in the bill, we want to focus a good amount on encouraging people to, creating a pathway for people to understand how to open up a facility. Do you all have a sense of how many agencies it takes to, how many agencies need to get involved to do that, and around, roughly how long it could take if
Sure. So
all goes well?
Right. Again, Department of Health is the lead because they are the licensing body. There is cross-collaboration between multiple city agencies that are required to kind of interject and assess space viability, including FDNY to check fire and safety regulations and compliance. Again, Department of Buildings, if there's some building considerations like elevators and things of that nature. New York City Housing Authority is also involved if the program is located in one of the NYCHA communities. This office does not currently participate in any of the licensing requirements or components. Right now it sits with Department of Health. However, we're happy to discuss any potential collaborations that could help either streamline or convene the multiple city agencies that are required to be part of the licensing process. We're happy to do that.
And do you have a sense of if all of those things are in order?
Very anecdotally, it takes several months, a couple of months at the least. It's a pretty comprehensive process. We want to make sure the space is viable. Mostly, it is also contingent if there's a Department of New York City Public School contract. There are also contract requirements in tandem with the Department of Health licensing. So those add another city agency to the mix for that. And again, if it's a direct federal Head Start program, the regional office is also involved in licensing.
Okay. I think that's it for me. The only thing I would love for you all to, if you can commit, is to include me in any future summits, especially me and my co-sponsor, Kevin Riley.
On record, you're invited.
Okay. Include me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. I just have a few more questions, I promise. I want to just thank the public for being super, super patient. But I want to ask you specifically, and then we'll move to public testimony, about accessibility and disability justice issues. Can you talk to me a little bit about, how the office is working to ensure that all of these facilities are ADA accessible. I know that we've already kind of gone through sort of some of the challenges with finding spaces generally, but is that amongst the challenges that might not have been mentioned?
In terms of the ADA compliance, I would have to refer to my colleagues at Department of Health to see if there is any statutes in Article 47 that require that stipulation. I know the goal is to make sure that children with a variety of abilities and needs are met. So whether that's connecting them to programs that do have ADA compliance already built in, including and not limited to something as simple as elevators to get from one floor to another. So we'll be able to circle back with Department of Health to see what is in the code currently for that.
And so obviously, like a key part of ensuring that we have universal child care in practice is making sure that children with disabilities are receiving their mandated services. And just to put this question into context a little bit, New York City Public Schools reported that as of April 2023, 10,580 preschoolers who were supposed to get speech, physical, or occupational therapy were not getting it, and another 1,970 preschoolers who were supposed to have a part-time special education teacher in their child care or early childhood class. They were not getting that service either. And obviously we know that those services aren't optional. So what are the steps that the city is taking to ensure that these children are getting all of their mandated services that the city is legally required to provide?
Correct. I know that New York City Public Schools added over 700 special education seats to stabilize the existing 6,000 children that were already in care. Obviously, there's still work to be done. There is a shortage of special education teachers, not just in the city, but nationwide, as one of the workforce issues that our early childhood is facing. But we plan to be in close conversation this program year to see that as many children are connected to the mandated mandated required special education services.
So we're not currently meeting the mandate. There's a gap in the number of special education providers to be able to meet the mandate, and the 15% PEG program implements a hiring freeze. And so with that in mind, I don't, math ain't mathing. I don't know how we ever meet that need if we are not able to hire.
Yeah, so I'll refer back to my colleagues at public schools, and I think their special education plan has to be articulated through what their approach is, but we're happy to convene and have conversations with them about that.
Yeah, I think there are so many aspects of the blueprint that sound great, but when connected with a 15% PEG, the blueprint becomes an aspirational memo and not much more than that, and it's a real concern. I don't know how any of those goals that are articulated are actualized under that environment. But keeping with making sure that we are providing for our students who maybe need special education classes, last December the mayor held a press conference and announced that he was guaranteeing that there would be a preschool special education class seat for every preschooler with a disability who needs one in spring 2023. Again, we mentioned that the federal law requires that, but in spring 2023, the public school leadership testified that there were still hundreds of children waiting for seats. That was, I'll acknowledge it was fewer than the year before. I guess I'm asking you the same question twice. I don't know how we get it done without more folks. I'll kind of push ahead again because I do want to get to public testimony. But the last area I would love to be able to cover is just language justice, right? Like if a child only speaks Mandarin, but their closest child care center doesn't have a Mandarin-speaking staff, is it the city's responsibility to add an extra staff member to that facility, or is it the family's responsibility to find a different daycare center? You talked about this a little bit using different examples, but are we again doing what we set out to do if then a parent has to travel an hour out of the way, 45 minutes out of the way to drop their kid off in the strain that puts on the family in a lot of different ways?
One of the things that I think community-based organizations in particular do so well is being culturally responsive to the needs of the families that are engaged and enrolled in their centers. And one of those components is language access and feeling welcomed in a space and having their children cared for and developed in the language that they understand and are familiar with. Community-based organizations is one of the pillars of how they approach the work, so I'm really happy to say that it is reflected currently in how CBOs approach early childhood work currently. In terms of supporting folks that are coming outside of neighborhoods that may not have that is definitely a conversation that we need to explore in partnership with New York City Public Schools, because it's a new need. And when you have a new need, to your point, it's like, well, how are we going to fund, support, resource that new need? So I definitely think it's a conversation that's nuanced and needs to be in partnership with public schools. And I would suggest looking at CBOs and kind of taking their expertise and approach to the work that they've been doing in that respect for so many years and do it so well. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you. That's my questions. I want to thank y'all for coming. I'm looking forward to the follow-up on some of the outstanding information. I also just feel the need to say that, we've all mentioned the PEGs over and over again, but I don't want to view that in a vacuum, right? Like, we're not saying, well, we can't do these things because of the PEGs, and so therefore we shouldn't do it, but actually saying quite the opposite, that this is a New Deal moment. And I've said the statistics up top, you've said it as well. Universal childcare is critical to the economic recovery and economic growth of our city, and is much, much more likely to have the kinds of effects we need in the city in terms of economics and people being able to provide for themselves and their families. And PEGs and austerity is not going to get us there. It's going to put us into a deeper hole, and what it's going to do is it is going to deteriorate city government infrastructure, social service administration infrastructure, so much that all that's left is the privatization of those services, which we know will then just widen wealth gaps and push more people out of the middle class into poverty, and it's an ongoing cycle. So we see this as a really critical part of the solution in advancing our city forward and making sure that everybody has the support that they need, and looking forward to continuing to collaborate with you all on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking forward to continued collaboration as well. Thank you for this morning. Thank you to the team, and thank you to the audience. Tova is going to stick around for it. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Do you need me to say anything again?
You want to tell folks translations here?
Otra vez, para cualquier persona que viene a dar su testimonio, se necesita ayuda con traducciones, por favor nos puede dejar saber. Si está en persona, levante su mano. Si está por Zoom, por favor, también levante su mano y nos deja saber. Muchas gracias. That was my, just customer service tone.
I like it. It's good.
Hello. Yeah.
It's good.
Thank you. Yeah, talk soon.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, members of the administration. We'll now hear testimony from the public. I'd like to remind everyone that I will call up individuals in panels, and all testimony will be limited to 3 minutes. I would like to note that written testimony, which will be reviewed in full by committee staff, may be submitted to the record up to 72 hours after the close of this hearing by emailing it to testimony@council.nyc.gov. And a reminder again, if you're in person but haven't signed up already, please go to the sergeant at arms at the back of the room to sign a witness slip so that we can call you. For the first panel, we'll actually call up a representative from the Brooklyn Borough President's Office, Hannah Mae Powers.
Hannah. Oh, we have her.
Right over there, yes.
So the room is weird because it's like you got to crane your neck over there to look at whoever is testifying.
Just do your whole chair. Look, you're doing these.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, my neck is
We
killing me.
we have them. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
we
guys
have
gave
it.
them out. She brought them. Thank you. Oh, do you want mine?
Is this thing on? Okay.
Oh, you took mine. You got yours in there somewhere.
Am I good? Okay. Good morning, Chair Caban, and thank you for holding this hearing today. My name is Hannah Mae Powers, and I am the Health and Safety Policy Analyst at the Office of the Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso. I'm here today because this issue is very important to the Borough President, as it is for thousands of families with children in our borough. One of Borough President Reynoso's highest priorities for his time in his office is to improve maternal health in Brooklyn. Today, Black mothers are 9.4 times more likely to die during or in the year after childbirth than their white counterparts. A major contributor to this unacceptable statistic is a lack of access to affordable pre- and postpartum health care and mental health care services. So what does this have to do with childcare? Multiple studies have shown that pregnant and postpartum mothers in America are experiencing dire financial stress. This is in part due to the costs associated with prenatal care, delivery, and postnatal care. Pregnant women are also at higher risk of experiencing domestic violence and homelessness, which can leave them with few resources following childbirth. Without adequate child care support, they are unable to secure work that would bring financial stability and the appropriate perinatal resources. In a study from the University of Michigan in 2021, more than half of new mothers studied reported experiencing financial stress and having difficulty affording needed child care. These challenges lead to an unending cycle between financial stress and postpartum and mental physical health care issues, such as substance use disorders, depression, and hypertension. Mother's financial stress also affects children and can contribute to malnutrition, poor academic performance, increased anxiety, and behavioral issues. For unborn babies, it may even mean additional health complications. A study from BMC Public Health earlier this year showed a direct correlation between financial stress of the mother and adverse birth outcomes, such as earlier gestational age and low birth weight. Between 2015 and 2019 in the United States, at least 1/3 of mothers had a second birth within 36 months of the first birth. Without adequate child care during the pivotal moment between the first and second births, many of these families would be left in a more distressed financial state, which in turn affects the health of both children. There's no question that the cost of childcare contributes to financial stress, especially in New York City, where the cost of good childcare for infants can exceed $25,000 per year. This is particularly acute for new mothers, according to the Center for American Progress. The average cost of center-based childcare in New York is approximately 80% higher for infants than it is for 4-year-old preschoolers. It is no wonder, according to the publication, in 2021, 41% of 25 to 50-year-old women living in New York City were not working, compared with just 24% of men. I want to acknowledge that we are having difficult financial times, and this will obviously be a costly program. However, our city's own Economic Development Corporation estimated in 2021... Oh, lovely. Thank you. Estimated in 2021 that New York City parents were leaving the private workforce or shifting from full-time to part-time would lead to a loss of 250,000 person years of employment, $60 billion in real output, and $18.5 billion in disposable personal income over the next 5 years. Essentially, we can't afford not to do this. And of course, with the employment concerns, Black and brown mothers are disproportionately affected by this issue. Thank you to Councilmember Gutiérrez for putting forward this bold legislation that would bring universal child care to our city, and for ensuring that fair wages for the city's child care workforce are part of this effort. Both policies are long overdue and will be transformative for New Yorkers. Borough President Reynoso is looking forward to continuing to work with the council on behalf of New York City's families and child care workers to move this proposal forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for sticking around.
Thank you so much. For the second panel, I will call up Laura Gomez, Rebecca Charles, and Stephen Morales.
Wherever you're from. I mean, not me. I don't know.
You may begin when ready.
Good afternoon. My name is Laura Gomez, and I'm an associate.
Oh, I don't think your mic is...
Oh, got it. Thank you. Is it on now?
It was right.
Okay, now it is. Okay, got it.
Good afternoon. My name is Laura Gomez, and I'm the Associate Director of Social Work in the Family Defense Practice at Brooklyn Defender Services. Thank you to the Committee on Women and Gender Equity and Chair Caban for holding this important hearing today on free universal childcare. BDS provides criminal defense, family defense, immigration, civil legal services for approximately 22,000 people every year. Our family defense practice is the primary provider of legal representation for parents in child abuse and neglect cases in Brooklyn. A lack of affordable and accessible childcare that is open the hours that parents need to work is a major drive of poor families into the family regulation system. Like the criminal legal system, race and poverty are defining characteristics of the family regulation system. Poor communities and communities of color are disproportionately impacted by the state's family regulation system. Access to free, high-quality childcare will help families stay together. We represent many parents in Article 10 cases in family court where lack of childcare is at the heart of their cases. I'll share just one example. When BDS first started working with Ms. C, she was facing the removal of her son to the foster care system. In spite of ACS's efforts to remove her 6-week-old son from her care, Ms. C persisted and fought to keep her son in care. After many months of complying with ACS's supervision over her family and engaging in court-ordered classes, Ms. C was able to secure a conditional dismissal of her family court case. Despite ACS involvement with Ms. C's family for many months, Ms. C struggled to secure affordable and flexible childcare that she needed for her family. As a single working mother with a limited family and community support, ACS sought to remove her son a second time, alleging that she was leaving her son with unapproved or inappropriate caregivers. While Ms. C and her legal team were again able to keep her son in her care, ACS continued to delay providing Ms. C with the child care voucher. After 8 months and an incredible amount of advocacy on Ms. C and her legal team's part, she finally received the daycare voucher, but has still continued to struggle to find an eligible provider. Ms. C's case illustrates that even with ACS and family court involvement, families struggle to access the child care they need, which might have prevented their ACS case in the first place. Low-income families should not have to be under ACS supervision and surveillance in order to access necessary child care. Currently, low-income and marginalized families are often forced to access child care through the Administration of Children's Services. Families experiencing over-surveillance and punishment from family policing systems should be able to access the vital resources without fear or interacting with systems that may cause them harm. BDS supports efforts to make childcare free for low-income New Yorkers, regardless of immigration status. Any program to expand childcare access must include outreach strategies to under-resourced communities to ensure that they can access high-quality childcare. Almost done. It is critical that provisions of childcare be available in neighborhoods where low-income people live and work and be accessible to families who may be juggling many other bureaucratic systems to access housing, schooling, insurance, and other benefits. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Hello, Rebecca Charles from the Citizens Committee for Children. I'd like to thank Chair Caban and all members of the committee for holding today's important hearing on improving our city's childcare system. We applaud city leaders like yourselves for taking a step in the right direction in the most recent budget by baselining $15 million for extended early childhood education to convert 3K school day, school year seats to extended day, extended year seats, as well as $16 million to continue funding Promise NYC. And I know you two were big champions on that. Unfortunately, the past few years have revealed serious and long-standing problems within the ECE system that have led to service instability and inaccessibility, and you have touched on some of those today in your questions. So CCC, in partnership with the Campaign for Children, put forth the following policy recommendations to move our city towards system stabilization, which were advance the next stage of salary parity for center-based workforce, support decentralized enrollment options, build a robust, culturally and linguistically supportive education and outreach effort at the community level, offer greater flexibility in center-based and home-based providers' contracts to increase their ability to respond to emerging community needs, and convert school day, school year seats to extended day, year-round options. This brings me to Intro 0941 by Councilmember Gutiérrez. CCC has long been a champion of childcare access for all New York children and families, and we look forward to partnering with you and other city leaders to achieve this goal of universal access. The path to universal childcare must include an operational approach that will address the many issues that currently exist within the city's ECE system, including delayed payments to providers, unfilled seats, and centralized enrollment. Bringing stability to the system is the first step to building a truly universal system. It is also crucial to secure sustainable funding through a combination of city, state, and federal resources, and an outline of the current funding breakdown for the city's ECE system will be provided in my written testimony. CCC stands ready to partner with you, Councilmember Gutierrez, in advocating for greater state and federal investments and city tax levy funding for early care and education to make universal care a reality. And finally, we want to thank Councilmember Menin for filing her resolution to pass Senate Bill 4924, Assembly Bill 1303, which we feel will take important steps toward removing bureaucratic hurdles families face when trying to access care. Thank you for this time to testify.
Chair Caban, Honorary Chair Gutierrez, my name is Stephen Morales, and I'm the New York Policy Director at All Our Kin. All Our Kin is a nonprofit organization that trains, supports, and sustains home-based family child care educators in New York City. We're based in the Bronx, and we work with nearly 300 family child care educators with the capacity to care for over 4,000 children citywide. I want to start by extending my appreciation to Councilmember Gutierrez, Councilmember Riley, this entire committee, and all the co-sponsors for your consideration of this bold step for children and families across our city. And we're also excited that the administration has taken the first step called for in this legislation by creating and hiring a director for the new Mayor's Office of Child Care and Early Education, who we heard from earlier today. We know there's still so much work to do to make childcare access a reality, and we look forward to doing that work together. Along those lines, I want to give some insight into the reality facing children, families, and providers. As part of my job, I spend time talking with family childcare educators who work with All Our Kin, and consistently I hear stories from them about families in their programs and their communities who are unable to afford childcare out of pocket and who cannot access the childcare assistance that they need. I hear about providers who help families in their programs apply for childcare vouchers, who then wait months before hearing back from the city about their eligibility. I hear stories about parents who seem to meet every eligibility criteria to receive a voucher that are denied for unclear reasons, or are told that they applied to the wrong program and need to start again with a different agency. When our subsidized childcare system serves less than 20% of eligible children in our city, and parents continue to struggle, we must understand that the system is fundamentally broken. And that's not to mention the thousands of families outside of the subsidy system who struggle to pay for childcare. At the end of the day, this leaves children without access to the high-quality care they need, and providers without the essential revenue they need to continue serving their communities. That's why this bill and this conversation today are so important. And there are several elements of this bill that I want to highlight because they're particularly important in acknowledging the full scope of this city's childcare needs. First, we celebrate the bill's call for childcare access for all families with children aged 6 weeks through 5 years, including specifically those who are undocumented. Childcare is necessary for everyone who works a 9-to-5 job and for the people who work day and night to keep our city running. We also celebrate this bill's thoughtful inclusion of family childcare in building a better system that meets the needs of all families. And critically important is the acknowledgement in this bill that care work is offered by people who need to be compensated, who need to be healthy, who need to be able to work and work every day and night. And we applaud this bill's requirement to pay childcare providers based on their real operating costs, not on any arbitrary grants or metrics. And we applaud this bill's call for healthcare and retirement benefits for educators, and importantly, including educators in center-based and family childcare. I will wrap up in just a second, I promise. Finally, this bill requires the city to evaluate our childcare system consistently, which is so important for being able to improve and build systems that work for families. So we know we need the funding to make this happen, and so we're excited to work together and hope the administration and the council will work together to make that funding happen for our city. And just again, I want to thank you all our kin, our staff, our team are here to help work through details and support in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. For our next panel, I'll call up Hannah Tager and Paula Inharg. How many people we have signed up?
After this, 2 more people. And then Zoom.
Yeah.
Cool.
You may begin when ready.
Thank you, Chair Caban and Councilmember Gutierrez, for the opportunity to testify on the childcare crisis in New York City today. My name is Paula Inargue, and I'm a policy analyst at United Neighborhood Houses. UNH is a policy and social change organization representing neighborhood settlement houses that reach 770,000 New Yorkers from all walks of life and that serve over 12,000 children in their ECE programs. UNH supports the goals of Intro 941. It recognizes the importance and value of early childhood education for both young children and their caregivers. We thank Councilmember Gutierrez for her leadership in developing this legislation in partnership with community stakeholders. We hope that Intro 941 is the start of a process and conversation for New York City to achieve a universal childcare system for children ages 0 to 5. At the same time, we know that the system needs significant support before expansion can be successfully advanced. If we do not attend to the underlying issues facing the sector, the system's foundation will not be stable enough to continue moving forward. Therefore, in addition to Intro 941, UNH has identified a number of actions the city can take to help reach the shared goal of universal childcare. First, ensure that the DOE contracts with and pays early childhood providers in a timely manner. Early childhood education providers who contract with the DOE have experienced significantly delayed contract reimbursements for the last 2 fiscal years. Despite the persistent attention to this issue over the last year, meaningful progress has not been made across the board for CBOs, and providers still report challenges with prompt payment from the DOE. This is unacceptable and is a cycle we must get out of if we're going to stabilize the system. Second, complete the path to salary parity for the early childhood education workforce. UNH Settlement House members report that the main obstacle for hiring and retaining staff in early childhood education programs is low salaries, which are required due to low contract values. Labor negotiations between the city, DC 37, and the Daycare Council of New York are underway, and we're hopeful they will result in a contract that compensates CBO staff, including teachers and support staff, in the same way as their DOE counterparts. To expand the early childhood education services that New Yorkers need, we need to ensure that all providers are able to offer competitive salaries and wages to their staff, as staff are the underpinning of programs. My written testimony goes into more detail and includes additional recommendations, including to continue and expand the Promise NYC program, expand access to extended day year programming, and ensure 3K for all continuity amid federal fiscal cliffs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you to Chair Caban and Councilman Gutierrez. Thanks for having me. I'm a policy analyst. I work with WIN. We're the city and the country's largest provider of shelter and supportive housing for families in transitional families experiencing homelessness. So we have more than 3,600 children in our shelters, and nearly half our families have a child under the age of 3. So for them, childcare is not a secondary issue. It's an instrumental part of their independent living plans. It means that they can work. It means that they can qualify for vouchers and move out of shelter. So because of our own private fundraising, we are able to provide barrier-free on-site childcare for 200 children annually, kind of similar to your universal childcare model. Doesn't matter your employment status, doesn't matter your documentation status, super high quality. We just received a citywide distinction from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, but we can only do this for a fraction of our families. The demand is much higher than the spaces we have for. That's because DHS does not provide funding for childcare and shelter, and the rest of our families rely on community-based childcares. We work with awesome providers. They're excellent. We build relationships with them, and that's not the issue. The issue comes when we have families applying for vouchers, and there's eligibility barriers there, and they're hard to utilize and delays. So usually upon arriving at our shelters, thanks to city law, most of our families will be immediately eligible for an HRA voucher, an ACS voucher, or Promise NYC voucher. For HRA vouchers, though, there's still that income eligibility requirement, and even if a family has a job offer, there's not enough time between when they get that offer letter and when the job starts. So realistically, our families can't really utilize HRA vouchers without having to ask employers to push that start date, which isn't really acceptable. ACS vouchers for a long time were a great option, and we're so happy that those are accessible for families regardless of their income if they're living in transitional housing. But in the last 6 months, we've faced extremely long wait times. So just as an example, as of September 13th, one of our families has been waiting since July for an ACS voucher. Even though they're deemed eligible, they get that eligibility letter, they don't actually get the voucher for a long time. And from my experience, for many years I helped families apply for childcare. It seems that there's one single staff member at ACS issuing those vouchers for all families in transitional housing. She's lovely, but she needs help, right? So finally, Promise NYC could be a huge benefit for our families. Nearly 1/3 of the families we serve are immigrants. So we're really excited about this resource, but there's not enough spots, right? So there's 600 plus spots right now. It seems like in the MMR and the city's budget, there's budgeting for 600 spots and no more. So we again have a family. We were really excited in July, applied, still waiting as of last week. So just some solutions we're excited about. Yes to your legislation. We're so excited to work on you with that. We're here if you want to talk about making accommodations for families living in transitional housing. Also really excited about the resolution sponsored by Julie Menin, because that will mean that again we get rid of that income restriction and requirement for families. One other thing as a suggestion is to automatically screen families for voucher when they arrive at PATH. So that, that is part of an independent living plan. It's as important as getting mental health care, case management, social work, et cetera. And there's no reason a family needs to wait until they're in shelter. So would love to add that to the holistic model at PATH. But we're happy to follow up with more suggestions we have. There's some in my testimony. And just want to say that the child care crisis is part of the homelessness crisis, and that providing affordable child care could be the difference between, contending with this current crisis we have and ending the generational cycle of homelessness. So very important. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. For the next panel, I will call up Maria Vieira and Gregory Brender.
What a solid panel. I mean, they've all been solid. No disrespect. And I love Marie's.
I'm listening.
Hi, Gregory.
He's been great. He's been super hands-on, but he's so sweet. And I'm just give these women their pay parity. Thanks for sticking around. I know you have to. I think you can do one. You can start whenever.
Hi, Chair Caban, Councilmember Gutierrez. Thank you so much for holding this important hearing, for your great questions, and all you're doing to advocate for early childhood. And I also want to particularly thank Councilmember Gutierrez for not just in this hearing, but in the run-up to all of this and in the creation of the bill, really engaging early childhood providers, because as we move towards universal child care, the people who provide childcare are so important to it. So I really want to thank you for being so inclusive of the early childhood community in pulling this together. Just wanted to talk about a few of the key things that we see as important steps in the road to universal childcare. Will probably not surprise you to say the first thing is to continue the unfinished work of salary parity. The teachers, directors, staff, providers who are in community-based childcare programs are paid significantly less than those in public schools, and it's not a surprise to see things like 90% of childcare centers in New York State are being short-staffed, and 776 classrooms throughout the state that are closed because programs cannot maintain their staff. So we are urging the city to make the investments to ensure that not only are providers paid a fair and thriving wage, but that they are at parity with their counterparts in the public schools, so that we can invest in the people who are caring for our youngest children at the period of the greatest brain development. We also are urging the city to move towards community-based enrollment. Community-based organizations have strong and deep connections with the communities they serve, and a lot of families are finding it difficult to navigate the DOE central enrollment system, and we want to have a hybrid system where families can come to the providers who they know and trust and enroll through them, find those programs that meet their needs. We also hope to see action to move the city to ensure that providers are paid on time and in full. Late payments have been a crisis for the early childhood providers. There are staff members who are not getting paid. There are home-based providers who are scraping by just to keep their doors open. There are centers that are considering closing and some that have had to close due to late payments and underpayments from the city. So on the path to universal child care, we really need these actions to take place to stabilize the systems as is and grow to the system that we all share, the vision of a city where it doesn't matter what your zip code is, what your parents' income is, all children have access to the highest quality early childhood education. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify and all you're doing to fight for childcare in New York City.
Can you hear me? Excellent. Good morning. My name is Maria Vieira. I'm Vice President of Community Affairs at Riseboro Community Partnership. I'm going to speak about lived experience, no stats. 35 years ago, I was forced to leave my job as my child care expenses were higher than my salary at the time. I suffered the detriment of one income for a family of 4, soon to be 5. 35 years later, I'm here to speak about a problem that 35 years later still remains unsolved. Families are still forced to having to choose between working or being slighted of an opportunity for economic mobility because of lack of access to affordable child care. I saw my daughter making a career switch because she had to find a job that worked in shifts, so she and her husband could alternate babysitting until their children became of school age. She was lucky, because that's not the case with the majority. I work in an organization that employs over 700 people. The story that I just shared, I hear time and time and time again from my colleagues. My colleague here, Jasmine, she's speaker shy. She's one of those statistics. I have to say that it shouldn't be so hard. It shouldn't be so hard in the greatest city in the world to provide access to affordable child care to everybody, everyone, with no exclusion. And that is my story. Thank you, Chair Caban. Thank you, Council Members Riley, Gutierrez, my favorite of the two, because she's mine. No bias, no bias. For championing Intro 941. This is a critical need. We shouldn't even have this discussion. This should be just signed off. But here we are today, and I will continue to share my story as often and as loud as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thank you, and I also want to thank Jasmine for being here. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jasmine.
Thank you so much. I also want to acknowledge that we had an advanced registration by an individual named Nigel Allison, if they're in the room. Okay, if not, that concludes the in-person portion of our public testimony. We will now move to remote testimony. If you are testifying remotely, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and you may begin once the Sergeant at Arms sets the clock and cues you. The first 3 people that we will hear from Zoom will include Queen Arsam O'Malley, Betty Baez, and Loris Nunez. Queen Arsam O'Malley, you may unmute.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you to the council for listening to testimony on this issue. My name is Queen Arsam O'Malley, and I live in Brooklyn. And since I became a mom almost 3 years ago, the biggest challenge to my family staying in New York has been finding and affording childcare. This bill is crucial to finding a way forward for working parents and the underpaid childcare providers in New York. The current childcare system means that everyone, parents and providers alike, are struggling to make ends meet. And universal childcare would alleviate so much of the burden that parents and providers are shouldering, and it would make New York more livable for families. When my daughter was in daycare, I borrowed money, spent my savings to afford care, and still had gaps in childcare. I cobbled together patchwork systems of friends, family, took time off work, and cared for my child while working from home. It was not sustainable for my family, even with a salary above the New York City average and flexibility that my job offers, and all of the other advantages that many of my fellow working parents don't have, including the ability to testify here today. I know personally many people who wanted to be able to testify and couldn't because they don't have childcare and are trying to juggle work and caring for their children at home right now. And safe and affordable childcare is far less attainable for thousands of families across New York. My daughter is now attending a 3K program, a program that the city successfully created to begin addressing these early child care concerns. Councilmember Gutierrez discussed this earlier in the hearing, but it does bear repeating that if my family had not gotten a spot in 3K, we would not have been able to afford care and we would have left the city. It doesn't have to be like this for working parents, and I urge the city council to do everything in its power, and I thank it for everything it's already doing to work towards universal childcare in the city. Thank you.
Betty Baez, you may begin once you are unmuted and the sergeant cues you.
I believe I can start if everyone can hear me. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss Intro 941 and the importance of early childhood education and care in New York City. My name is Betty Baez Mello, and I'm an attorney and the director of the Early Childhood Education Project of Advocates for Children of New York. We believe that every child should have access to high-quality early childhood care and education programs. As such, we support the vision of this bill. In order to create a truly universal childcare system, we want to stress the importance of ensuring that any childcare plan gives significant attention to marginalized populations that are often overlooked, including children with disabilities, children from immigrant families, and children in temporary housing. My written testimony outlines some of the concerns and barriers that these families face. We appreciate that the bill includes several provisions for addressing the disparities faced by these populations. At the same time, given the extent of the barriers, we encourage you to strengthen the bill so that the responsibilities of the Office of Child Care include the following: ensuring that children with developmental delays or disabilities have access to their mandated early intervention and preschool special education services at their child care programs so that they can participate in inclusive programs with their peers. Coordinating with the Department of Education to ensure that there is a preschool special education classroom seat available for every child who needs one so that children with significant disabilities can receive the intensive special education services that they need. Ensuring that children have access to early childhood care and education programs regardless of their immigration status, including all of the Department of Education's infant and toddler programs and extended day and year 3K and pre-K programs. Ensuring that the proposed education and outreach campaign informing city residents about the availability of childcare is conducted in multiple languages across various platforms so that families who speak languages other than English, families who have low literacy, and families who do not have access to online resources can all access information on their childcare options. Conducting an education and outreach campaign specifically targeted at families of young children living in shelters and assisting families living in shelters with the application and enrollment processes. Facilitating interagency collaboration and convenings with relevant agencies, including the Department of Education, the Department of Homeless Services, the Human Resource Administration, and the Administration for Children's Services to increase enrollment of children in shelter in all of these programs. And providing additional support and funding to childcare programs as needed to support children with disabilities and children who speak languages other than English. Based on our experience working directly with families, we believe that these recommendations will help ensure the expansion of early childhood care and education is more equitable and inclusive of the populations we serve. And I also want to flag that we are deeply concerned that the city is currently using hundreds of millions of dollars in temporary federal COVID-19 relief funds to support 3K and preschool special education, key components of the city's childcare infrastructure. This funding will be expiring next year, and there is not yet a plan to sustain these programs.
Time expired.
The City Council must ensure continued funding for 3K, preschool special education, and a wide range of other important education programs funded with the temporary federal dollars that will be running dry in June. Thank you. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for the suggestions, but also particularly for something that I certainly failed to ask the administration about was, in fact, what was the plan when those federal dollars expired. So thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you. Loris Nunez, you may unmute.
Hi, good morning. Well, afternoon. My name is Loris Nunez, and I would like to thank the council for giving me this opportunity to be able to speak. I'm coming more from a standpoint of my daughter's 6 years old now, so the struggle of childcare was really more when she was younger. Now it is a little bit easier for me because of the after school programs that they have, and because my job is more flexible. But I remember having to call out of work, have to take less time at work, and I was already part-time to be able to pick up my daughter because there was no programs or any after school or anybody that can help me before she was able to be in the after school programs. So having these fundings for childcare, especially for young parents, is critical. A lot of these young parents don't even have a job to be able to afford the childcare. And even with the ACS voucher, which really helped me a lot, it was difficult for me to pay the $15 a week and continue to do so with me just being 16 and not having a job. I remember having to save up $5 that my mom would give me to make it. So I honestly think that the city doing this is going to provide such a big help and relief to parents, especially single parents. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. The next three on Zoom who will be called to testify are Musfika Moshahid, Jeremy Kaplan, and Ethan Heitner. Musfika Moshahid, you can begin once you are unmuted.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Honorable Chairwoman Tiffany Caban, all council members, and everyone present. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on such an important issue. So my name is Mushfika Moshahid, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Women's Program Coordinator at the Muslim Community Network, a nonprofit organization here in New York City working to empower the Muslim community through civic education and community service. Having access to childcare can be an incredibly empowering experience for women and individuals with children, and we've seen that firsthand at MCN through our women's program and other programming. So our Muslim Women's Program serves older Muslim women who are usually mothers, and so it was important for us to provide childcare during our program so that our participants could enjoy the program. By providing childcare, we have not only been able to support our program participants, we were also able to provide work opportunities for undocumented and immigrant women that we've hired to conduct childcare. Many of our women said it was the first time that they saw an organization take care of them in this way. And thanks to the childcare that was available to them, they were able to participate in the program and take part in educational workshops ranging from intro to civic engagement, voting, how to write and reach out to their city council members, and learning about their rights when it comes to self-defense and hate crimes prevention. Women were also just able to enjoy being in community with other Muslim women, forge friendships with each other, and explore their identities outside of being a parent and caretaker, all while having the ease of knowing that their kids were being taken care of. Our participants expressed that without the childcare, they otherwise would not have been able to have participated. We have now made it as a priority as an organization to provide childcare wherever possible throughout our programming because we've witnessed the firsthand effects it can have on participants and the doors that can open. We see there's a strong need for funding with this work, and having access to childcare allows women, especially undocumented women, to focus on fueling their studies, finding employment, or taking part in opportunities that further their personal development and joy. Many of our participants are low-income immigrant women, and they've they've expressed interest in finding employment but struggle due to a lack of childcare access. Our women are usually Black women and women of color. Many of them are undocumented, and lack of childcare access is just one more obstacle in a constantly changing job market, which makes it hard for them to find employment. Every woman and parent deserves the space to explore their potential, their interests, and develop themselves while knowing that their kids are taken care of. In general, childcare, caretaking, homemaking, and other forms of domestic labor have long been underappreciated and undervalued within our society. We need to create a world where women and parents can feel included and cared for within our societies instead of being treated as an afterthought. It's time we also prioritize this work and move towards a future where we can live in a society where childcare and other forms of domestic labor are seen as just as important, necessary, and deserving of as much compensation and investment as any other issue. My hope is that one day we come to a place where childcare access, childcare centers exist in all parts of society and are the norm, standard, and commonplace. The legislation proposed today would be the start of that.